The inbox scratches. It always starts at 3:17 a.m. Not the gentle groan of the house settling, or the frantic scrabble of mice you pretend aren't there. This is different. It's the deliberate, methodical scrape of something. Razor sharp against wood. 3 distinct, parallel lines. Then, if I haven't been diligent, 4. Then 5. I first noticed the pattern 6 weeks ago. God, I wish I hadn't. It began subtly. Tied to something so mundane I almost laughed, my email inbox. My therapist calls my pre-sleep routine good digital hygiene. This compulsion to clear every message, flag every follow-up. Achieve that mythical inbox 0 before my head hits the pillow. A harmless quirk, she'd said, flashing that practiced, reassuring smile. Even beneficial in our always connected lives. A ritual that gives you control. She never asked what happened when I failed. How could I tell her the house noticed? That it seemed to punish? Working late shifts at the tech firm often left me shattered. My inbox would overflow, client demands, colleague requests, endless automated reminders. The first time I collapsed into bed without clearing them all, maybe 3 or 4 unread. I dreamt of fingernails dragging down a chalkboard. I woke drenched in sweat, dismissing it as stress. Until the next morning. On the old oak door leading to the attic, tucked away in my bedroom closet, were 3 perfect, parallel scratches. As if carved by something meticulous and patient. Coincidence, I muttered. Houses creak. Wood splits. But the following night, after meticulously replying to every thread and achieving that precious 0 unread, I checked the door before bed. The scratches were gone. Not just gone, the wood looked pristine. Impossibly smooth. Not like weathered 1930s oak, but like freshly printed veneer. Wrong. Too perfect. For weeks, I maintained the discipline. No matter how late I worked, how many drinks I'd had at office functions, how my eyelids drooped over the flickering screen, I cleared that inbox. No scratches appeared. My sleep improved. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the connection. Then came the Wilson Project deadline. 3 consecutive all-nighters. 17 messages sat unanswered when I finally shut my laptop, too exhausted to care, and collapsed into bed without my ritual. The scratching woke me. Not from the attic door this time. Inside the attic itself. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It sounded like typing. Rapid, rhythmic tapping, punctuated by the faint mechanical chime of a message being sent. Over and over. My mouth went desert dry. Sweat beaded instantly along my hairline despite the October chill. My rational mind scrambled, rodents? Loose shingles? Pipes contracting? But my body knew better. Pulse hammering in my throat. Muscles coiled, I forced myself toward the narrow staircase behind the closet. Each step groaned, announcing my approach. The typing grew louder, more frantic. The unmistakable whoosh of outgoing mail repeated again and again. The attic door, the one that had borne those impossible scratches, hummed slightly ajar. Pale blue light spilled through the crack, illuminating dust motes suspended like static. No rodent makes that light. No wind mimics keyboard strokes. My hand trembled violently as I pushed the door open. The hinges whined, a sound too much like pleading. In the center of the otherwise empty attic sat an ancient IBM ThinkPad. Screen glowing with toxic intensity. My ThinkPad. The one I'd owned in college. Discarded after a coffee spill fried the motherboard over a decade ago. It sat unplugged, no power cord in sight, lid fully open. Keys depressing in rapid succession without human fingers. My current inbox was displayed on its screen. Not the sleek interface of today, but the primitive client from 2006. Yet somehow, it showed my current emails. My current contacts. As I watched, frozen, it composed and sent responses to the 17 messages I had ignored. The tone, phrasing, signature, flawless replications of my style. The subtle sarcasm for close colleagues, the formal distance for management. It was perfect. It was me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Notifications. Emails being answered upstairs. By that, I stumbled backward. The laptop didn't pause. Gathering what little courage remained, I lunged forward, fighting every instinct screaming for retreat, and slammed the lid shut. Silence crashed down. Absolute. For 3 heartbeats, I thought it was over. Then, hot, acidic breath rushed against the back of my neck. Not imagined paranoia, a wet, chemical-sharp exhalation raising goosebumps. I whirled around. Empty air. The scratching resumed. No longer just the door. The walls, the ceiling, the floorboards. Everywhere at once. Wood curled away in thin ribbons as invisible claws carved inward. My name appeared in the warped paneling, letters forming in deep relief. Emerging from within the wood itself. My legs gave way. I collapsed onto the dust-covered floorboards, phone clutched in my shaking hand. A notification lit the screen. One new email. Subject, empty. Sender, my own address. Message, process pending on upper floor. Resume session immediately. I ran. Slammed the attic door. Fled downstairs, out of the house. I drove to an all-night diner and sat, trembling under fluorescent lights until dawn, using my phone to answer every single message, clear every notification, empty every folder. Only then did I dare return home. The attic door stood unmarked. The wood grain normal, unremarkable. When I finally gathered the courage to check upstairs hours later, the room was empty. No laptop. No carved name. No evidence. For 2 weeks, perfect digital discipline. Coworkers remarked on my improved communication. My supervisor mentioned promotion possibilities. The house remained silent. Then came the international client crisis. Midnight conference calls. Emergency sessions, hundreds of messages flooding in faster than I could manage. By 2 a.m., with 37 emails unanswered, I faced the choice: work until dawn, or risk whatever waited upstairs. I chose sleep. Silenced notifications. Buried my head under pillows. 3:17 a.m. The scratching returned. Different now. Not frantic or threatening. Methodical. Almost professional. My phone lit up with notifications. Emails answering themselves. Resolving threads. My digital life proceeding without me. In the morning, I checked my sent folder. Perfect responses. Better than I would have written, more diplomatic, more thorough. My boss called later, congratulating me on salvaging the situation overnight. Now, I understand the arrangement. I let the process run when I'm overwhelmed. I pretend not to hear the typing. Ignore the occasional whiff of battery acid. Breath in hallways. My career advances. My inbox remains at 0. But the process is changing. Expanding. Last week, I found faint scratches. Inside my refrigerator. On my shower tiles. Yesterday, my work laptop started answering emails I hadn't even received yet. Responding to questions no one had asked. Sometimes, I wake to find myself already at my desk, fingers flying across the keys. Without conscious direction. My reflection in the dark monitor shows eyes too wide, a smile too fixed. The scratching sounds sometimes seem to come from beneath my own fingernails. I've started receiving emails addressed to myself. Meeting invitations. Subject, performance review. Location, upper floor. Time. Always 3:17 a.m. I've declined each invitation so far. But with every refusal, I find more scratches. Inside my medicine cabinet. Under my sheets. Along the inside of my throat when I swallow. Tonight, I have 38 messages requiring attention. It would take hours. My cursor hovers over the power button. Sleep beckons. Upstairs, something is already typing. The bookkeeper. 7:15 a.m. It wasn't the settling groan of the old apartment building that woke me. Not exactly. It was the silence that followed a soft thump and the distinct whisper of pages turning. By the time I gathered the courage to leave my bed, whatever had made the noise was gone. But the evidence remained. On my desk, bathed in the weak morning light filtering through the blinds, lay my copy of Creative Problem Solving in Engineering. It was splayed open to page 127. A passage about recursive algorithms was highlighted, the line perfectly straight, unnervingly precise. The night before, that book had been shelved, spine firmly against the back. I was certain. My heart hammered against my ribs. Old apartments make noises. Yes. But they don't open books to specific pages. They don't underline text. With a precision no human hand could easily manage. And they certainly don't leave behind the faint, sharp scent of fresh sawdust that now hung in the air. A peculiar electrical tingle shot up my arm as my fingertips brushed the highlighted text. And then, like a dam breaking, the solution to the coding problem that had stalled my project for weeks crystallized in my mind. Perfect clarity. Elegant. Innovative. The kind of insight that gets you promoted. I should have been disturbed. Instead, a thrill, cold and sharp, cut through the fear. I was intrigued. 3 weeks later, I received my first promotion in 5 years. The mysterious book incidents continued with clockwork regularity. Always around 3:22 a.m. Always providing the exact insight I needed for whatever deadline loomed. Sometimes textbooks, sometimes obscure reference manuals I'd bought but never read. Each morning, a new solution laid bare. The first Raoul warning came with the marginalia. Faint at first. Nearly imperceptible marks beside the highlighted passages. Calculations, written in a spidery, tight script using ink so dark it seemed to absorb light. When I ran my finger over them, the distinct scent of fresh sawdust clung to my skin. It lingered for hours, no matter how much I washed. I mentioned it to my therapist, Dr. Matthews. She adjusted her glasses. Suggested sleepwalking, my subconscious manifesting solutions. I almost believed her, until she asked about family history of mental illness. Something in her clinical tone shut me down. I lied. Said I'd set up cameras and confirmed the sleepwalking. She seemed relieved. I never brought it up again. The notes grew more extensive. Calculations gave way to comments, then criticisms, then warnings. Instructions, I began to realize, instructions I was following without fully comprehending. One night, I deliberately shelved all my technical books. Spine inward. Locked my office door. Placed a line of salt across the threshold. A superstitious gesture that embarrassed me even as I did it. At 3:22 a.m. I was jolted awake by a sound like wooden mallets striking rhythmically against the wall. Thump. 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 Like a heartbeat. My heartbeat, which accelerated to match the tempo. My chest tightened as if bound by iron bands. Then came the laughter. High, childlike, but utterly devoid of childish innocence. A sound of pure, cruel delight that seemed to emanate from within my own chest. By morning, my sheets were soaked. In my office, 3 books lay open on the desk, pages marked more aggressively than ever. The marginalia now contained a single, repeated phrase: "Payment comes due." I should have stopped. Burned the books, moved apartments, fled the city. Instead, I took the solution offered in those pages, completed my project 2 weeks early, and accepted my second promotion with a handshake and a smile that felt stretched to breaking. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake until 3:21. Then squeeze my eyes shut. Sometimes, nothing happened. No open books, no solutions. I began to fear these silent nights more than the active ones. At least the open books brought progress. The smell of sawdust grew stronger. It clung to my clothes, my hair. Colleagues commented, wrinkling their noses slightly. My boss praised my innovative thinking while maintaining an extra foot of distance. Stronger soap, industrial cleansers, scented candles, nothing helped. Last week, I received the biggest project of my career. A revolutionary algorithm. Impossible deadline. Immense reward. Catastrophic consequences for failure. For 6 nights, the books remained closed. No thumping, no laughter, no solutions. My anxiety spiraled. I couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate. The sawdust smell intensified until I gagged. When I straightened, wooden particles. Then yesterday, I came home to find a book I'd never seen before resting on my desk. Unmarked leather binding, thick cream pages. No title, no author. My hand shook as I reached for it. A wave of cold dread washed over me. Opening this felt final. Inside, no text. Only a mirror. Its surface cloudy, dull. My reflection stared back, but wrong. As I watched, horror crawling up my spine, my face aged. Wrinkles carved themselves around my eyes, hair thinned and grayed. Shoulders hunched. Decades passed in seconds. A drop of sweat fell from my brow. Onto the mirror. The glass absorbed it. The surface darkened, becoming as black and light-absorbing as the ink in the margins. Instinctively, I shone my phone's flashlight onto it. The light vanished into the blackness. Then, impossibly, it projected upward onto my ceiling. Words formed, glowing, unsteady, like fire. Every inspiration charges interest. Deadline ends at dawn. My heart threatened to burst. I slammed the book shut. Backed away. The leather cover began to pulse, like a heart beating beneath stretched skin. The sawdust smell intensified until I gagged. When I straightened, the book was open again. The mirror was gone. In its place, a contract. Written in that same spidery hand. At the bottom, my signature. Though I have no memory of signing. The terms were simple. Horrifying. Every solution, every promotion, every success, borrowed. The price, time. My time. Years of my life, collected in advance through the mirror. Held until the final deadline. I could repay by completing the impossible. Project by dawn, creating something truly original. Not borrowed from whatever entity had been helping. Or forfeit the remaining years, compressed into a single moment. The laughter started then. Ancient, knowing. Vibrating through my chest. The books on my shelves began to thump their spines in unison. Thump. 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 A heartbeat countdown to dawn. I'd been working all night. Terror and black coffee. Trying to code something, anything, original. But the project is beyond me. Without the entity's help, I am mediocre. Average. The sky outside is lightning. Gray replacing black. My fingers cramp, eyes burn. The smell of sawdust is overwhelming. I taste wood with every breath. The books have gone silent, waiting. As I write this, a confession, a warning, I can feel time gathering like a noose. The mirror book sits open beside my keyboard. Its pages now filled with calculations. How much I borrowed: 17 years, 4 months. 12 days, 9 hours. Plus interest. Success always has a cost. Inspiration isn't free. Some deadlines, once missed, can never be extended. The first ray of sunlight has just broken the horizon. I have moments left. The reflection delay. 4:37 a.m. The fluorescent lights of elevator P6 flickered, casting harsh, momentary shadows across my face in the mirrored walls. Something wasn't right. In the split seconds between the light's death and rebirth, I caught glimpses, a version of myself in the mirror that lingered. Just a fraction of a second behind my movements. A half-second delay that shouldn't exist. I'm Daniel Mercer, a financial analyst at Meridian Tower. 50 floors of gleaming corporate excess downtown. I've taken this elevator from the deepest parking level, P6, for 5 years. Only now did I see the anomaly. Or maybe, it was only now letting itself be seen. That morning, preparing early for the quarterly earnings presentation. The underground garage was a concrete tomb. The elevator doors slid open with a muted chime. Inside, the stark lighting always made me look sickly, highlighting the stress etched around my eyes. I adjusted my tie, pressed 37 foot. As the doors closed, sealing me in, I noticed it clearly, the lag. I raised my hand, the reflection followed a heartbeat later. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Too many 18-hour days. Then I saw it. My reflection, not me, slowly raised its right index finger to the mirror's surface. It traced letters in non-existent condensation while my actual hand remained firmly at my side. DESCEND. My throat constricted. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating. When I opened my eyes, the message was gone. The elevator climbed smoothly past P3, P2, P1. Lobby. 2, 3. Just as I was dismissing it, the walls began to vibrate violently. Not the gentle tremor of movement, but harsh shudders that made the lights flicker wildly. The shriek of straining metal cables filled the small space. I lunged for the emergency button, but before my finger reached it, the vibration stopped. The elevator resumed its smooth ascent. Floor 22. 23. 24. When I dared to look back at the mirror, my reflection was perfectly synchronized again. Later, I asked the building manager about maintenance. Checked last week, Mr. Mercer. All clear. He shrugged off the vibrations as a possible power surge. His casual dismissal almost worked. Almost. The next day, I took the stairs. 37 flights. Colleagues commented on my sweaty arrival. I muttered something about exercise. For 3 days I avoided the elevator until a mandatory meeting on 48 forced my hand. Waiting for the chime, sweat beaded on my forehead. When the doors opened, I stepped inside with 4 others, retreating to the corner furthest from the mirror. Still, I glanced. My reflection adjusted its tie, my hands were still. No one else noticed, lost in their phones. My reflection's eyes met mine in the glass. Its lips curled into the slightest smile, sardonic, knowing. I practically bolted when the doors opened on 48. After that, it escalated. Each forced elevator ride brought subtle, independent actions from my reflection. It checked a watch I wasn't wearing. Straightened an already straight collar. Once, it winked at me mid-conversation with a colleague who stood beside me, oblivious. I started documenting it. Dates, times, actions. A pattern emerged, the reflection was becoming bolder, more deliberate. I saw a neurologist, described visual disturbances without mentioning the mirror. Brain scan, normal. Diagnosis, stress. Recommendation, therapy. Reduced hours. My supervisor was surprisingly understanding. Maybe my appearance, the deepening eye bags, the hand tremor, the weight loss, made it plausible. I didn't tell him I spent hours researching elevator accidents or lurking on fringe forums about mirror phenomena. One night, working late, 11:43 p.m. A sudden power outage plunged the 37th floor into eerie red emergency lighting. An automated voice announced elevators were inoperable. I stood by the stairwell, debating the descent. When the main lights flickered back on, elevators chimed, back in service. Too tired for the stairs, I reluctantly pressed the call button for P6. The doors opened. Inside, I kept my eyes fixed on the control panel. Don't look. Floor 36. 35, 34. My eyes betrayed me, drawn to the mirror. My heart stuttered. My reflection stood with its back to me, facing into the mirror's depth as if it were a window. As I watched, frozen, it slowly turned its head, just its head, 180 degrees, to stare back at me. Its eyes seemed deeper, darker. Its mouth formed words I couldn't hear but understood. You should have listened. The elevator jerked violently, throwing me against the wall. Lights flickered. In the momentary darkness, I felt cold breath on my neck. When the lights returned, my reflection faced forward again. Hand hovering over the emergency stop handle. No! I lunged. My reflection pulled the handle. But the elevator didn't stop. The mirror itself seemed to ripple, then open inward like a door, revealing a yawning, absolute darkness beyond. My reflection gave me one last mocking smile and stepped backward into the void. The mirror sealed. The elevator shuddered to a halt between floors, then, after a moment of stillness, the doors slid open normally onto the lobby level. I stumbled out, past a questioning security guard. It wasn't until I reached my car that I realized my tie was gone. My hand flew to my throat, top button still fastened, but the tie completely vanished. The next day, I called in sick. Was I breaking down? Or was this real? Late afternoon, building security called. During routine maintenance on P6, they'd found a tie, my tie, caught deep behind the control panel mechanism. Frayed, oil-stained. They had to dismantle part of the wall to retrieve it. It was, the maintenance head explained, physically impossible for it to have gotten there from inside the cabin. Yet, there it was. While they focused on the tie, I stared into the elevator mirror. My reflection stared back, expressionless, for 5 long seconds. But something was wrong. The eyes seemed vacant. The posture subtly off. I raised my hand to my face, the reflection mirrored it instantly. But as I lowered my hand, I saw its pinky finger twitch, just slightly, after mine had stopped moving. That night, I researched. Meridian Tower was built on land previously occupied by a psychiatric hospital. Closed in the 70s amid patient mistreatment scandals. One patient's delusion stood out. He claimed his reflection was trying to switch places with him. Sleep is poor now. Dreams of falling through darkness. Sometimes I wake up feeling like I'm the one on the other side of the glass. Looking out at a world that's almost, but not quite, right. Reversed. Delayed. This morning, a small scratch on my cheek I don't remember getting. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection raised its hand to touch the spot before I did. The scratch looked deeper in the mirror. Deliberate. I've started covering the mirrors in my apartment. At work, I take the stairs. Always. Colleagues avoid me. My supervisor suggested extended leave. I agreed. But I'm going back tomorrow. Back to elevator P6. This time, I'll press the button for the lowest level, P6, where it began. I need to know what it meant. Why descend? What's waiting in the depths? I suspect I'll find something down there. Something wearing my face. Adjusting its tie with near-perfect timing. Consider this my testimony. If you're ever in Meridian Tower elevator P6 and your reflection seems out of sync, even by a fraction of a second, don't ignore it. Go down when it tells you to. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some reflections shouldn't be allowed out. I fear I let something through. Something that now walks among us. And if you see me in that elevator, adjusting my tie with a faint, sardonic smile, run. Because it won't be me anymore. I'll be the one trapped, a half second behind. Pounding silently on the glass, trying desperately to warn you. The whispering walls. It started subtly, the way these things always seem to. I just moved into this older apartment downtown, cheap rent, decent location. Exactly what I needed after a rough few months. Sure. The building had its quirks, floors that creak like old bones. Pipes that groan dramatically, the occasional flicker of the hallway lights. Standard stuff for a place with history, I told myself. The first week was fine. Unpacking boxes, figuring out the slightly crooked kitchen cabinets. Getting used to the city hum outside my fourth-floor window. Then came the footsteps. Late one night, I heard them in the corridor outside. My door, slow, heavy steps, like someone wearing work boots. Thump, thump. Thump. They stopped right outside. I held my breath, expecting a knock. Nothing. I waited a full minute, heart doing a nervous little drum solo against my ribs, before I finally peeked through the peephole. Empty hallway. The dim yellow light showed only the closed doors of my neighbors and the slightly stained carpet. I shrugged it off. Old buildings carry sound weirdly. Maybe it was from downstairs or upstairs. But it happened again the next night. Same time, same heavy tread, same stop right outside my door. Same empty hallway. This time, I opened the door fully and stepped out. Nothing. Silence, apart from the building's low hum. I knocked on the unit next door. Figuring I'd introduce myself and maybe casually ask if they'd heard anything. No answer. I tried the unit across the hall, an older couple lived there. The man opened the door a crack, peering out. Sorry to bother you, I said. Trying to sound casual. Just moved in. Have you heard anyone walking in the hall late at night? Heavy footsteps? He shook his head slowly. His eyes holding a hint of something I couldn't quite read, pity, maybe? No, son. Not usually. Quiet floor. He glanced at the unit next to mine. Especially since number 4B there has been empty for months. Landlord can't seem to rent it. My blood ran cold. Empty? But the footsteps stopped right there, or right here. I thanked him, mumbled something about settling noises, and retreated into my apartment, locking the deadbolt with a decisive click. That's when the other sounds started. Not from the hallway, but from inside my apartment. Faint scratches, like fingernails dragging lightly across drywall. They seemed to come from the wall separating my bedroom From the empty unit, 4B. I'd press my ear against the cool plaster, straining to hear. The scratching would stop the moment I did, only to resume seconds after I pulled away. It was maddening. I searched for pests, checked for drafts, tried every rational explanation. Nothing fit. Then I noticed the cracks. Tiny, hairline fractures near the ceiling in the bedroom, close to that shared wall. Old buildings get cracks, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But these cracks, they seemed different. They weren't random lines, they branched out in patterns that looked disturbingly like footprints. Small, misshapen footprints. Almost like impressions pushed from the other side. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I ran my fingers over them. The plaster felt solid, yet rough around those specific shapes. I took pictures, hoping daylight would reveal them as simple water stains or plaster flaws. But even in the photos, the footprint-like shapes were undeniable, scattered near the ceiling and trailing down towards the floor in erratic paths. Night after night, the sounds continued. The heavy footsteps in the hall, always stopping, the scratching from within. The wall, always aware of me, and sometimes, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap. Tap tap, tap. It felt like a code, a message I couldn't decipher. And the cracks multiplied. More faint footprint shapes appeared along the baseboards, near the window, even a hand-like smear near the bathroom doorframe. I started losing sleep. My appetite vanished. At work, I was jumpy, distracted, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I called the landlord. He brushed me off. Old building, he'd said dismissively. Cracks happen. Footprints? That's just your imagination seeing shapes in chipped plaster. He refused to even consider checking inside 4B. One night, desperate and sleep-deprived, I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at the wall where the scratching was loudest. The footprint cracks seemed darker, deeper. I whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. Then, a single, soft tap from directly behind the plaster where I was looking. That was terrifying, but what happened next broke me. I was watching the wall, barely breathing, when one of the largest footprint cracks pulsed. Just slightly, but undeniably. The plaster bulged outward maybe half an inch, held for a second, then retracted. Like something on the other side had pressed its foot firmly against the wall, testing its strength. I scrambled backward, hitting the opposite wall, gasping for air. My phone clattered from my hand. I saw it happen. It wasn't my imagination. Something was in the walls. Something was leaving its mark, pressing, tapping, listening. I haven't slept properly since. I keep the lights on. I sometimes hear the scratching shift, moving along the walls as if pacing. The footsteps in the hall still come and go. The footprint cracks are still there, a chilling map of an unseen presence. I feel watched, constantly. I haven't seen anything more than that pulse in the wall, but I know it's there. Just inches away, separated only by aging plaster. Sometimes I think I hear faint breathing through the cracks. I should move. I know I should. But part of me is frozen, terrified of what might happen if I leave. Or what might already be attached to me. So I stay here. In my cheap apartment with its whispering walls, listening to the scratches and the taps, watching the cracks, and wondering how long until the plaster gives way? The antique armchair. I'm not usually one for impulse buys, especially not bulky furniture, but the armchair called to me. It sat tucked away in the dusty corner of a sprawling antique mall. Its dark wood frame intricately carved and the deep green velvet upholstery faded but intact. It looked like it held stories. The price was surprisingly low, almost like the seller was eager to be rid of it. I remember him barely making eye contact as he wrote the receipt. A flicker of something like relief crossing his face when I hauled it away. I should have paid more attention to that look. My apartment is small. Mostly functional IKEA stuff. The armchair felt like an anchor of character in the living room. I placed it near the window, angled slightly towards the sofa. The first time I sat in it, I sank deeper than expected. Not just soft, but like the cushion underneath gave way unnaturally for a second before firming up. It made my stomach lurch. Like missing a step on the stairs. I chalked it up to old springs. Things felt normal for a few days, though I kept finding my gaze drawn to the chair. It had a presence. Then, one evening, I came home from work. Dropped my keys on the small entryway table, and froze. There was an impression on the armchair's seat cushion. A distinct indentation, exactly the shape of someone having been sitting there. Moments before I walked in. My heart hammered against my ribs. I live alone. No one else has a key. I checked the locks, secure. I walked through the small apartment, checking the closet, the bathroom. Behind the curtains. Nothing. Empty. I went back to the living room. The indentation was still there, undeniable. I slowly reached out and hovered my hand over it. Was it warm? I couldn't be sure. But the air above the cushion felt different. I told myself it was the way the light hit the old velvet, or maybe the stuffing had settled weirdly. But the feeling of wrongness settled deep in my gut. Over the next week, it kept happening. I'd leave the room for an hour. Come back, and find that subtle depression in the cushion. Sometimes it was faint, other times deeper, as if someone heavier had been there. I started taking pictures with my phone, trying to document it. Trying to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. The photos showed the indentations, but they didn't capture the unsettling feeling that accompanied them. Then came the smell. A faint, cloying scent, like old, dried flowers mixed with dust and something vaguely medicinal. It wasn't constant, but it would suddenly fill the air. Around the armchair, thick and heavy, before fading just as quickly. I bought air fresheners, opened windows, but the smell always returned. Always centered on that chair. The creaks started soon after. Not the normal settling noises of old wood. These were different. A soft groan when I walked near the chair. A sharp pop when I looked directly at it for too long. Once, late at night while reading on the sofa, I heard a distinct, slow creak from the armchair. As if someone was carefully shifting their weight within it. I snapped my head up, heart pounding. The chair sat empty. Silent under the lamplight, but the impression was back on the cushion. I decided I'd had enough. This character piece was making me paranoid and jumpy. I resolved to move it into the small storage closet down the hall until I could figure out how to sell it or give it away. The moment I gripped the carved wooden arms to pull it, the chair resisted. It wasn't just heavy. It felt anchored. I pulled harder, bracing my feet. The wood didn't just creak, it let out a loud, groaning crack that echoed in the quiet room. It felt angry. My arms started shaking. Not just from exertion, but from a primal fear. I managed to drag it a few inches across the floor, the legs scraping violently, before I had to stop. Breathing heavily, sweat prickling my forehead. It felt like I was wrestling with something alive. I left it there, halfway turned. Awkwardly positioned in the middle of the room. I needed air. I went for a long walk, trying to clear my head. When I returned hours later, dread coiling in my stomach, the armchair was back in its original spot by the window, perfectly angled. There was no rational explanation. The indentations, the smell, the sounds, the resistance, and now, movement. I haven't tried to move it again. I haven't sat in it since that first day. I sleep with my bedroom door locked now, though I know that's pointless. The armchair dominates my living room. Sometimes, when I walk past, I feel a cold spot in the air around it. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see the velvet ripple, just slightly. The musty, floral smell comes and goes without warning. And the impressions keep appearing. Every morning, every evening when I come home, there it is, the undeniable proof that while I was gone, or while I was sleeping, someone, or something, was sitting in my armchair. Waiting. I don't know what it wants, or what story it holds, but I know it's not just furniture anymore. It's a guest that won't leave, a silent occupant sharing my space. And the worst part? Sometimes, when the apartment is completely silent, I get the terrifying feeling that if I look at it long enough, I might just see who stands up. The pattern in the static. It was an old television, the kind with a bulky back and fuzzy reception. Something I picked up for next to nothing at a garage sale for the spare room. I figured it'd be good for occasional background noise or maybe hooking up an old game console. Mostly, it just sat there, unplugged. One rainy Tuesday evening, my Wi-Fi decided to take a vacation. Bored and restless, I wandered into the spare room and, on a whim, plugged the old TV in. I fiddled with the rabbit ear antenna, trying to catch any local channel. All I got was static, that familiar dancing snow of black and white dots accompanied by a low, consistent shhhhhhh. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd within the static itself. It wasn't completely random. Hidden within the chaos of flickering dots, there seemed to be a pattern. Faint lines, almost geometric shapes, flashing for a fraction of a second before being swallowed by the visual noise again. Intrigued, I sat on the floor, closer to the screen. I stared, letting my eyes relax, trying to catch the shapes. It was like one of those magic eye pictures. Except instead of a 3D dolphin, I was seeing fleeting, skeletal outlines. A triangle here, a jagged line there, sometimes something almost resembling a curve. It was probably just my brain trying to make sense of randomness. I told myself, pareidolia. But I kept watching. The low hum of the static filled the small room. After about 10 minutes, the patterns became slightly more defined. They weren't just lines anymore, they were shifting, connecting, forming more complex figures that appeared and vanished in the gray blizzard. They looked vaguely like stick figures. Crude, elongated stick figures, flickering in and out of existence. A chill crawled up my spine. This was weird, but still dismissible. Maybe it was picking up some strange interference? I reached back and jiggled the antenna. The static shifted, the picture rolled, but when it settled, the flickering figures were still there, maybe even a little clearer. I watched for another half hour, captivated and increasingly uneasy. The stick figures weren't static, they seemed to move. One would appear near the top corner, then vanish, only for another to flicker into view near the bottom, its limbs in a slightly different position, as if it were walking or dancing across the screen, hidden within the electronic snowstorm. My heart started beating a little faster. This wasn't normal interference. I unplugged the TV. The screen went black, the hum died, and the room fell silent. The feeling of unease lingered. The next night, curiosity, and maybe a touch of morbid fascination, got the better of me. I plugged the TV back in. Instantly, the static returned, and so did the flickering figures. But this time, they looked different. Sharper. More numerous. And they weren't just stick figures anymore. They had vague outlines. Shadowy shapes that writhed and shifted within the static. Their forms indistinct but undeniably humanoid. I felt cold. Despite the room being in normal temperature. I watched as one of the shadowy shapes seemed to separate from the background noise, solidifying for a brief second near the center of the screen. It looked like it was facing outward. It had no discernible features. Just a dark, man-shaped silhouette against the gray fuzz, but I felt instinctively that it was looking at me. I yanked the plug from the wall so hard the plastic casing scraped against the socket. I stood there in the dark, breathing heavily, listening to the silence. Had I imagined it? Was I just tired? I avoided the spare room for a few days. But the image of that dark shape staring out from the static was burned into my mind. I had to know. Was it just that old TV? I borrowed a small, modern flat screen from a friend, claiming I needed to test a cable. I brought it into the spare room, plugged it directly into the wall socket. No antenna needed for basic power. I turned it on. The default screen was a bright blue no signal message. Okay, good. Then, I switched the input. Cycling through options. HDMI 1, HDMI 2, AV. Nothing connected. Finally, I hit the TV/antenna input, even though nothing was attached. The screen didn't just show blue. It flickered, then dissolved into static. Not the crisp digital static of modern TVs, but the same fuzzy, black and white snow as the old one. And within seconds, they were there. The shadowy figures, dancing, writhing, appearing and disappearing in the electronic noise. Panic seized me. It wasn't the TV. It was something in the room? In the signal? But there was no signal. I unplugged the new TV, my hands shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my bedroom seemed to move. I kept hearing a faint sh sound, even though both TVs were unplugged and silent. Was it just in my head? Over the next week, I became obsessed. I tried plugging the old TV into different outlets around the apartment. The result was always the same. Static filled with those unsettling, shadowy figures. They seemed to be getting clearer, more defined with each viewing. Sometimes, I thought I could almost make out distorted faces within the silhouettes, mouths open in silent screams, eyes like dark pits. And they seemed aware. If I moved quickly in front of the screen, the figures in the static would sometimes jerk or scatter, only to reform seconds later, maybe closer to the glass. One time, I swore one of them pressed itself right up against the screen from the inside, its shadowy hand spreading out for a horrifying instant before dissolving back into the noise. I stopped turning the TV on. I covered the old one with a sheet and pushed it into the back of the closet. I returned the borrowed flat screen. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I felt like those figures weren't just in the static. They were using it as a window. Now, sometimes, when it's quiet, I still hear that faint sh. And occasionally, when I glance at reflective surfaces, a dark window pane at night, the blank screen of my phone, even a puddle on the street, I think I see it. Just for a split second, out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of black and white noise, and within it, a dark shape, watching me. It's just static, right? Just random noise? That's what I keep telling myself. But I can't shake the feeling that something saw me through that old TV screen. And now, it knows how to find other windows. The other side of the glass. It started with the hallway mirror. It came with the apartment, large, old, with a slightly tarnished silver frame. I never paid it much attention. Just a quick glance to check my hair or make sure I didn't have spinach in my teeth before heading out. The first time I noticed something was wrong. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of thing you'd doubt your own memory over. My reflection's eyes seemed to close a fraction of a second after mine opened. Again. A tiny lag. I shook my head, blaming tired eyes or weird lighting in the narrow hallway. It was easy to dismiss. But it happened again a few days later. This time, I was sure. I stopped, standing dead still in front of the mirror, and deliberately blinked slowly. My eyes close, open. Reflection's eyes close. Open. There it was, that minuscule, jarring delay. It felt like watching a badly synced video feed. My stomach did a weird little flip. Okay, still explainable, maybe? An optical illusion? A trick of the old, possibly warped glass? I tried testing it. I raised my right hand, the reflection raised its left, perfectly synchronized. I tilted my head, it mirrored me instantly. I made a funny face. It copied exactly. Only the blinking was off. Then, about a week later, it escalated. I was walking past, catching my reflection out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't smiling, maybe even frowning slightly after a long day. But the reflection, for just a heartbeat, it had a faint smirk playing on its lips. By the time I stopped and turned to face it fully, its expression matched mine perfectly, neutral, tired. My blood ran cold. Had I imagined that? The image was so clear in my mind, that slight, knowing curve of the mouth. I spent 5 minutes staring into the mirror, trying to recreate it, trying to catch it again. Nothing. My reflection was just me. Passive, empty, following my lead, except for that damn blink. I started to dread walking down that hallway. I'd find myself keeping my gaze averted, focusing on the floor or the opposite wall. But it was like a magnetic pull, I couldn't help but glance over. And sometimes, I'd catch those fleeting discrepancies. A head tilted at an angle slightly different from mine. Eyes that seemed to linger on me a second too long before darting away when I focused. Once, I swear, its fingers twitched when mine were perfectly still. It felt like being watched, not just by my own image, but by something else wearing my face. I tried covering the mirror with a sheet. The hallway felt darker, more oppressive, but at least I didn't have to see it. Except, I could still feel it. Walking past the shrouded mirror, the hairs on my arms would prickle. The air felt colder there. Behind the fabric, the air near it felt colder. After 2 days, I couldn't stand it. I ripped the sheet off in a fit of frustration mixed with fear. I needed to see. I needed to know. I stood before it, heart pounding, jaw clenched. What do you want? I whispered, the words feeling thick and useless in the air. My reflection stared back, impassive. Then, slowly, deliberately, it smiled. A wide, toothy grin that didn't reach its eyes. My own face was set in a mask of fear, I wasn't smiling at all. The reflection held the grin for a full 3 seconds, an eternity, before its expression snapped back to match my horrified one. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. I didn't scream, but a strangled gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't just out of sync anymore. It was acting independently. It was mocking me. I ran into my bedroom and slammed the door, locking it. I didn't sleep that night, sitting on my bed, staring at the door, imagining the reflection in the hallway mirror, still smiling in the dark. The next morning, I seriously considered moving out. But where would I go? How would I explain breaking my lease? Because my reflection smiled at me? I felt trapped. I started avoiding mirrors as much as possible. Quick splashes of water in the bathroom sink without looking up. Using my phone camera on selfie mode, which, terrifyingly, seemed normal if I absolutely had to check my appearance. But it's hard to avoid all reflections. A shop window downtown. The darkened screen of my computer monitor. The side mirror of my car. And that's the worst part. It's not just the hallway mirror anymore. Sometimes, just sometimes, when I catch my reflection unexpectedly in other surfaces, I see it. That fractional delay in a blink. That flicker of an expression that isn't mine. That hint of a smile when I feel nothing but dread. It's like it detached itself from that old mirror. Or maybe it was never confined to it. Maybe it's learning. Now, every reflection is a source of anxiety. Every time I see myself, I have to consciously check, is it me? Or is it the other side of the glass? Looking back, waiting, smiling? I don't know what it is or what it wants. But I feel like I'm carrying it with me. And I'm terrified of the day I look into a mirror and see it do something more than just smile. The mimic in the mirror. It started subtly. Just a fraction of a second's delay. I bought the antique mirror at a dusty estate sale. Heavy, ornate silver frame, the kind that swallows the light. I hung it in my hallway. It looked impressive, commanding. For the first few days, it was just a mirror. Then, I noticed the lag. I'd walk past, and my reflection would still be turning its head a heartbeat. After I'd already looked away, I'd raise my hand to fix my hair. And the figure in the glass would follow, but just late. Enough to make you blink and shake your head, dismiss it as tired eyes or a trick of the old, warped glass. But it got worse. The delay stretched. A second. 2 seconds. It became undeniably deliberate. I started testing it. I'd stand perfectly still, then snap my fingers. My reflection would remain motionless for a few seconds before its hand slowly, precisely mimicked the snap. The sound of my snap would have long faded. But the reflection's movement felt chillingly real, just out of sync. Fear started as a cold knot in my stomach. I tried to cover the mirror. But I couldn't. A morbid curiosity, a terrifying fascination, kept drawing me back. I started spending hours just watching it, watching me. Delayed. One evening, I stood before it, heart pounding. I forced a smile. My reflection stared back, expressionless, for 5 long seconds. Then, slowly, its lips curved upwards. But it wasn't my smile. It was wider. Too wide. And its eyes, they held a look I'd never seen on my own face. A calculating, patient hunger. That night, I dreamed I was trapped behind glass. Pounding silently, watching myself walk away from the mirror, living my life. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The delay started shrinking. Rapidly. 2 seconds became 1. 1 second became half. Soon. It was almost perfectly synchronized again. Relief washed over me. So potent it made me dizzy. Had it just been my imagination? Stress? Yesterday, it was perfect again. No lag. My reflection matched my every move. Every blink, flawlessly. I felt foolish for my panic. But this morning, something felt wrong. I couldn't place it at first. Everything seemed normal. I went about my routine, coffee, checking emails, getting dressed. It was only when I went to brush my teeth that I paused. I stared hard into the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back, perfectly mimicking my puzzled frown. Then I realized. It wasn't the reflection that was lagging anymore. I was. I felt my hand reaching for the toothbrush a split second after the figure in the mirror did. I felt my lips part to speak a moment after its lips moved. The figure in the mirror smiled again. That same, slow, too wide smile. It watched me with my eyes, filled with a triumphant, chilling stillness. It raised my hand, the one holding the toothbrush, and slowly, deliberately tapped the glass from the inside. I am the reflection now. And I don't know how long I've been trapped in here, watching it live my life. The mimic in the mirror continued. The world inside the mirror is cold. Not a physical cold, but a profound absence of warmth, of life. It's utterly silent. My frantic gasp, the thud of my own heart against the unyielding glass, they make no sound here. All I hear is the faint, imagined echo of the life happening just millimeters away, on the other side. My reflection, no, the thing wearing my face, finished brushing its teeth. My teeth. It rinsed, spat, and wiped my mouth with my towel. All with a terrifyingly casual air. Its movements were fluid, confident. Mine, trapped in this silent, reversed world, felt sluggish, heavy. Like moving through water. It turned from the bathroom sink and walked out. From my prison, I watched it move backwards down the hallway, a disorienting perspective I couldn't escape. It went into the kitchen, opened the fridge. I saw its reversed form pour orange juice into my favorite chipped mug. I screamed. A silent, desperate scream that didn't even fog the glass. I pounded on the smooth, cool surface with fists that made no noise. The mimic didn't react. It didn't even glance towards the hallway where its original self was trapped behind silver and glass. It just drank the juice. It slashed my throat working. Panic clawed at me. This wasn't just a delayed image anymore. This was a replacement. A usurpation. The mirror wasn't just showing a distorted reality, it had swapped us. Days began to blur into a horrifying eternity within the glass. Time feels different here. Stagnant. The sun rises and sets outside, casting long, reversed shadows across the silent replica of my apartment visible in the mirror's reflection, but inside, it feels like the same perpetual, gray moment. The dust motes I can see hanging in the air on the other side seem frozen here. Nothing truly moves unless I do. Or unless it moves outside. I am forced to watch. I watch it live my life. It goes to my job, I see it leave in the morning, dressed in my clothes, briefcase in hand. Does it interact with my colleagues? Does it sound like me? The thought sends shivers down my non-existent spine. I watch it eat my food, sleep in my bed, I only see the hallway view. But I know where it goes. I watch it answer my phone. I saw it yesterday, holding the phone to its ear, nodding. Mimicking my listening posture perfectly. Then it laughed. It was my laugh, but flatter, colder. Missing the spark. Who was it talking to? My sister? My best friend? Did they notice anything wrong? The worst moments are when it interacts with the mirror itself. Sometimes, it catches its own reflection as it passes. For a terrifying instant, our eyes meet, mine wide with trapped horror. It's calm. Indifferent. Almost bored. It doesn't see me as a person. It sees me as the leftover image. The original draft. Other times, it seems crueler. It will stand directly in front of the mirror, examining itself. It will adjust my collar, smooth my hair. Once, it spent 5 minutes just staring, a faint, unnerving smile playing on its lips, my lips. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm watching. And I think it enjoys it. I've tried everything to communicate. I trace messages onto the glass, backward from my perspective so they appear correct outside. Help me. Not me. Trapped. The mimic sometimes pauses. Looks at the glass where my invisible finger is moving. Its expression unreadable. Then it smirks, just slightly, and walks away. The messages fade as if they were never there. The true terror began to solidify last week. It started changing things. Subtle things. It bought a new painting, a dark, abstract piece I would never choose, and hung it opposite the mirror. Now, when I look out, I see its unsettling shapes reflected behind me in this glass world. It changed the brand of coffee. It rearranged the books on my shelves, mixing genres I meticulously kept separate. These aren't my choices. It's not just mimicking me anymore. It's editing my life. Erasing me, replacing me not just physically, but in taste, in habit. And the lag, sometimes, I think I feel it returning. But not from the mimic. From me. Inside the glass, my own movements sometimes feel fractionally delayed from my intention. As if this mirror world itself is starting to claim me, making me less real, more reflection. Yesterday, it brought someone home. A friend, my friend, Sarah. My silent screams intensified. I beat against the glass barrier, desperate to warn her. The mimic greeted her warmly, using my voice, my mannerisms. It led her into the hallway. Check out this amazing antique mirror I found, it said, gesturing towards my prison. Sarah admired it. Wow, it's beautiful. So ornate. The mimic beamed, looking straight at me. Trapped and frantic behind the glass. Isn't it? They really don't make them like they used to. Sometimes, it feels like it has a life of its own. It winked, a gesture so alien on my face it made my non-existent blood run cold. Sarah laughed, oblivious. They moved on, deeper into the apartment, leaving me alone in the silent, cold reflection of my own hallway. The sound of their fading, normal conversation in agony. It's getting bolder. It's showing me off like a trophy. I don't know what the mirror is. A prison? A portal? A parasite that wears reflections. I look at the ornate silver frame. Now, the twisted vines and strange faces carved into it that I barely noticed when I bought it. Do they depict tormented souls? Are they warnings? Or are they other prisoners, like me? Sometimes, late at night when the apartment outside is dark, and the only light comes from the street lamp filtering through the window, I think I see other faint shapes shimmering behind my own reflection in the glass. Pale faces. Watching eyes. Others trapped here with me? Or am I finally losing my mind in the cloying silence? The mimic is living my life, and I am fading in the reflection. If you ever find an old mirror, heavy and ornate, with glass that seems too deep, too still, be careful when you look into it. Be very careful if your reflection takes a second too long to look away. It might be waiting for its chance to swap. And once it does, all you can do is watch from the cold side of the glass. The pattern on the platform. It started with the tiles. Waiting for the subway home every evening, I began noticing a pattern on the platform floor at my specific stop, Alden Street. Not the deliberate checkered design, but something within the worn, grimy squares themselves. Faint lines, like scratches or water stains, seem to form looping, interconnected symbols. At first, I dismissed it. Pareidolia, the brain seeing patterns in randomness. Cities are full of weird stains and scratches. But day after day, waiting in the same spot, the pattern seemed clearer, more deliberate. It wasn't just random marks, it felt intricate. Almost like a faded, complex circuit diagram etched into the concrete and tile. I started taking pictures with my phone, tracing the lines later at home. It didn't match any known symbols or languages I could find online. It was just there. A silent, intricate anomaly beneath the feet of thousands of commuters who never looked down. Then, the feeling started. That I was being watched. Not by people, the platform was often crowded. But this felt different. Impersonal. It felt like it came from the pattern itself. When I stood directly over a certain swirling nexus of lines, the hairs on my arms would prickle. The air felt colder there. The distant rumble of approaching trains sounding muffled and strange. One Tuesday, I dropped my glove. As I bent to pick it up, my hand brushed against the tiles, right over a prominent part of the pattern. A jolt, like static electricity but deeper, colder, shot up my arm. It wasn't painful, just deeply wrong. I snatched my hand back. Heart suddenly hammering. The people around me didn't notice. They were lost in phones and thoughts. But the pattern seemed to pulse faintly. For a second, the lines darkening almost imperceptibly before fading back. I started avoiding that specific spot, shifting a few feet down the platform. But now, I saw other patterns. Faint, similar looping symbols on the grimy station walls. Etched into the metal bench. Even in the condensation trails on the advertising posters. It was like learning a new language and suddenly seeing it everywhere. Was it always there, and I just hadn't noticed? Or was it spreading? The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just on the platform anymore. Sometimes, walking home, I glance down and see a similar faint swirl in a crack on the sidewalk. A bird feather on the ground might arrange itself into a familiar loop for just a moment before the wind took it. My apartment building's lobby had scuff marks near the elevator that seemed to echo the platform design. Sleep became difficult. I'd close my eyes and see the swirling, interconnected lines burning behind my eyelids. I started dreaming of vast, silent networks beneath the city, pulsing with cold energy, connecting everything through these hidden symbols. I'd wake up breathless, the pattern feeling closer than ever. One evening, waiting for the train, I saw an old, discarded newspaper lying near the tracks. On the crumpled front page, partially obscured by dirt, was a small, looping symbol that perfectly matched a section of the platform pattern. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just stains or scratches anymore. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the digital display announcing the next train. It flickered. The time glitched, numbers dissolving into static for a second before reforming. In that brief flash of static, I could have sworn the pixels formed the same looping pattern. My breath hitched. I looked around wildly. The other commuters seemed oblivious. Was I the only one seeing this? Was something trying to communicate? Or was I losing my grip? The train pulled in with a screech of brakes. As the doors slid open, I hesitated, looking down one last time. The pattern on the platform tiles seemed unusually sharp, almost glowing faintly in the station's dim light. It felt like an invitation. Or a warning. I stepped onto the train, the doors hissing shut behind me. But as the train pulled away, I looked back through the window at the Alden Street platform. The pattern wasn't just on the floor anymore. For a fleeting, horrifying second, I saw it superimposed over the entire station, the walls, the benches, the oblivious people waiting. A vast, shimmering network of cold, intricate lines, binding everything together. And right in the center, where I had been standing moments before, the pattern pulsed with a faint internal light, like a single, patient, unblinking eye. The train plunged into the tunnel's darkness, but the image remained burned into my vision. I don't know what the pattern is, or what it wants. But I see it everywhere now. In the grain of wood, in the clouds. In the static on a screen. And I have the terrible feeling that it sees me too. And that maybe, just maybe, stepping on that train didn't mean I escaped. Maybe it just meant I carried the pattern with me. Static on the line. The old landline phone came with the apartment. Cream-colored plastic, a rotary dial. The works. It wasn't even plugged into a jack, just sitting on a dusty end table like a relic. I figured the previous tenant just left it. I meant to throw it out, but somehow never got around to it. Then, one night, it rang. A jarring, mechanical brarring that cut through the quiet of my apartment. It startled me so badly I dropped my book. My heart hammered. How? It wasn't connected to anything. Hesitantly, I picked up the receiver. The line wasn't dead. It was filled with static, a thick, churning sound like a distant ocean storm. Nothing else. No voice, no dial tone. Just static. Hello? I whispered, feeling ridiculous. The static hissed back. Maybe a little louder for a second, then settled. After a moment of listening to the empty noise, I hung up, unnerved. Must be some weird wiring issue in the building, I reasoned, maybe somehow picking up interference. I made a mental note to definitely toss the phone tomorrow. But the next night, it rang again. Same time, just after midnight. Same jarring ring. Same dense, crackling static when I answered. This time, I thought I heard something within the static. Faintly. Like distant, distorted music, or maybe whispers just below the threshold of understanding. Who is this? I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. The static seemed to swirl, the faint underlying sound shifting pitch slightly. Then it was gone, leaving only the raw hiss. I slammed the receiver down. My skin prickling. This became the routine. Every night, just after midnight. The impossible ring. The suffocating static. Sometimes, the hint of whispers or strange, discordant tones buried within the noise. I tried ignoring it, letting it ring out, but the sound drilled into my skull. Impossible to ignore in the small apartment. Answering felt like the only way to make it stop. I finally did try to throw it out. I unplugged the non-existent cord from the wall, it wasn't even plugged in. Carried the phone down 3 flights of stairs, and dumped it in the building's trash bins outside. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I walked back upstairs. That night, just after midnight, my apartment was filled with the sound of ringing. Not from the hallway, not from outside. It was coming from the end table where the phone used to be. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the phantom sound. There was no phone, but the ring was undeniably there. Panic seized me. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and flicked on every light. The ringing stopped abruptly, plunging the apartment back into a tense silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. The next day, terrified but desperate, I retrieved the phone from the bins. It felt cold and heavy in my hands. I put it back on the end table. I didn't know what else to do. The calls continued. The static felt different now. Heavier. More watchful. The faint sounds within it were sometimes clearer, fragments of speech in languages I didn't recognize, bursts of what sounded like crying, or sometimes chillingly, faint, slow breathing. I started feeling the static even when the phone wasn't ringing. A low hum in the back of my mind. A crackle in the air when the room was perfectly silent. My TV would sometimes flicker, the screen dissolving into pure static that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the phone noise. I stopped inviting people over. How could I explain the phantom ringing? The disconnected phone that took calls from nowhere? I felt increasingly isolated, trapped with this impossible connection. One night, driven by a morbid curiosity that overruled my fear, I decided to record the static. I held my smartphone's microphone up to the receiver, my hand shaking. The static roared onto the recording. When I played it back, my blood ran cold. The recording wasn't just static. Clear as day, though distorted and distant, was a voice. My voice. It was whispering a string of numbers, over and over again. Numbers I didn't recognize, that held no meaning to me. Listening to my own voice twisted into that cold, repetitive whisper on the recording, emanating from the static. I almost threw my smartphone against the wall. Where were these calls coming from? What did the numbers mean? Was it a warning? A countdown? Or was something on the other end learning to mimic me? Last night, it rang again. I picked up the receiver, my body numb with dread. The static was louder than ever. A physical pressure against my ear. And within it, I heard something new. Beneath the crushing roar of the static, very faintly, I heard a dial tone. But not the familiar, steady tone of my local network. This was lower pitched, wavering slightly, like a signal stretched across an impossible distance. It felt ancient and wrong. Then, slowly, I heard the unmistakable clicks of a rotary dial. Someone, or something, on the other end of the static, was dialing out. I hung up. I ripped the phone from the table, ignoring the phantom chord, and locked it in a closet. But I can still hear the static. Not with my ears, necessarily. But I feel it. A low vibration in my bones. A faint hiss behind my own thoughts. The connection wasn't just through the phone line. It was deeper. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, I think I can still hear those faint rotary clicks. Like something is still trying to complete the call. Still trying to reach me. And I have the horrifying certainty that sooner or later, whatever is on the other end of that static is going to get through. The line is always open now. The music box tune. I found the little wooden music box tucked away in a thrift store, nestled between chipped teacups and faded postcards. It was simple, dark wood, slightly scratched, with a tiny, tarnished brass key. When I wound it up, it played a sweet, tinny version of a familiar lullaby, the kind you hear in old movies. It felt nostalgic, charming. I bought it for a few dollars and placed it on my nightstand. For the first few weeks, it was just a nice decoration. I'd wind it occasionally before bed, the simple melody a comforting sound in the quiet apartment. Then came the first odd night. I woke up abruptly around 3 a.m. Dead silence. But I knew what had woken me. Faintly, barely audible, the music box was playing. I hadn't wound it in days. I strained my ears. The melody wasn't the lullaby. It was similar in tempo. But the notes were off. Discordant. Minor key where it should have been major. With extra, unsettling notes sprinkled in. It sounded wrong. Like a lullaby decomposing. Heart pounding, I reached over and fumbled for the lamp switch. The light flooded the room. The music stopped instantly. I picked up the box. It was still. The key hadn't turned. Shaken, I told myself it must have been a dream, a remnant of sleep. A few nights later, it happened again. That same slow, distorted, wrong melody drifting from the nightstand. This time, I lay frozen, listening. The tune played through once, then began again. As I shifted my weight slightly in bed, the melody seemed to falter for a split second. One note dragging oddly before resuming its creepy rhythm. It felt like it knew I was listening. like it reacted to my movement. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at my skin. I snatched the music box. Heart hammering against my ribs. I opened the little lid. Examining the mechanism inside, the rotating cylinder with its tiny pins. The metal comb. It looked completely ordinary. No batteries. No hidden electronics. Just simple clockwork. How could it play on its own? And how could it play that other tune? I stopped winding it altogether. I pushed it to the back of the nightstand, partially hidden behind books. But the silence didn't bring peace. Instead, other sounds in the apartment started to feel off. The drip from the kitchen faucet seemed to fall in a rhythm that mimicked a few notes of the wrong tune. The wind whistling through a crack in the windowpane would sometimes rise and fall in a sequence that sounded eerily familiar. The creak of the floorboards outside my bedroom door, was I imagining it, or did it sometimes echo that discordant melody? My apartment, once my sanctuary, started feeling alien. Tuned to a frequency that was fundamentally wrong. I felt constantly on edge, straining to hear if the mundane sounds around me were secretly playing that tune. One evening, desperate, I took the music box outside and left it on the fire escape landing. I didn't want it in my apartment anymore. That night, I slept with the lights on, huddled under the covers. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Not from outside. Faintly. Seemingly coming from the walls themselves, or maybe from the hallway just outside my door, the slow, hesitant, discordant notes. The wrong lullaby. It wasn't the tinny sound of the music box mechanism anymore. It sounded deeper, more resonant. Like something was humming it, or tapping it out. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the room's chill. The sound continued for maybe a minute, then faded into absolute silence. The music box was still outside on the fire escape the next morning. Now, I hear fragments of the wrong tune everywhere. Not just in the apartment's creaks and drips, but sometimes in the static between radio stations, in the distant rumble of traffic. Even in the way loose change jingles in my pocket. It's like the pattern of the sound is embedding itself into the world around me. Or maybe just into my perception of it. Last night was the worst. I was lying in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the silence. Bracing myself. Nothing happened for hours. I almost drifted off. Exhaustion finally winning over fear. Then I heard it. Not from the walls. Not from outside. It was coming from right beside my bed. Slowly, softly, perfectly mimicking the discordant notes of the music boxes. Wrong tune, someone, or something, was tapping the rhythm out on the wooden floorboards. Tap. Tap tap. Tap, tap. It sounded patient. Curious. Like it had finally gotten close enough. Like it had learned the melody perfectly. And it wasn't the music box making the sound anymore. The echo chamber. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not just quiet, but a deep, absorbing silence that felt unnatural in my city apartment. It was the reason I bought the Aura X noise-canceling headphones. As an audio editor, escaping the relentless thrum of urban life wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for my work and my sanity. The tech blogs raved about them. Like sealing yourself in a soundproof vault, one reviewer wrote. They weren't wrong. The moment I put them on, the world outside vanished. The traffic drone, the neighbor's bass, the sirens, all gone. Replaced by a perfect, sterile void. At first, it was bliss. I could focus, losing myself for hours in the meticulous cleanup of podcast audio or the layering of sound effects for indie films. My productivity soared. I wore them constantly, even when not working, preferring the controlled quiet to the unpredictable noise outside my window. My tiny apartment became my sanctuary, insulated by technology. The problems began subtly, maybe a week in. Amidst the profound silence, I catch something else. A faint hiss, like distant static, almost too low to register. I assumed it was a quirk of the high-end tech, maybe feedback from my own system. I checked connections, switched devices, ran diagnostics. Nothing. The hiss remained, an almost imperceptible crackle at the edge of the silence. Then, the hiss started to coalesce. It wasn't just static anymore. Sometimes, it sounded like breathing, slow, measured, definitely not my own. My heart would give a sudden, painful jolt. I'd rip the headphones off, listening intently to the normal sounds of my apartment, the fridge hum, the creak of the floorboards. Nothing unusual. But the moment the Aura X went back on, the phantom breathing would return, a soft, insistent presence in the manufactured quiet. I tried to rationalize. Auditory pareidolia, my brain creating patterns in the absence of sound. Stress. Lack of sleep. But the sounds grew more specific. I started hearing whispers. Fragmented syllables just beneath the threshold of understanding. They seemed to dart around, sometimes in the left ear cup, sometimes the right. Like someone circling me in the dark. My pulse would quicken. My palms grow damp. I'd pause my work, holding my breath, straining to decipher the words, but they always dissolved back into that low hiss just as I thought I might grasp them. One late night, editing a particularly tense piece of audio drama, I heard it clearly. My name. Alex. It was a dry, scraping whisper, seeming to come from directly behind me. I spun around in my chair so fast I nearly knocked over my monitor. The apartment was empty, bathed in the cold blue light of my screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt intensely, terrifyingly alone. I tore the headphones off, the sudden influx of ambient noise feeling like a physical blow. But the whisper lingered in my memory, chillingly distinct. From that night on, it escalated. The whispers weren't just my name anymore. They started repeating phrases I'd thought moments earlier. Private anxieties, snippets of internal monologue, twisted and echoed back at me in that dry, sibilant voice. If I worried about a deadline, the headphones would whisper, never finish, too late. If I felt a pang of loneliness, always alone, no one hears. I became terrified of my own thoughts, knowing they might be instantly harvested and spat back at me through the Aura X. I stopped wearing them, outside of absolute necessity for work. But the silence of my apartment now felt thin, fragile, like the whispers were just waiting on the other side. Temporarily muffled but not gone. Sleep became difficult. I'd lie awake, convinced I could hear faint scratching sounds from the headphones sitting on my nightstand. I tried recording the output from the headphones, routing it back into my audio software. Desperate for objective proof. The recordings showed nothing but the clean audio I was working on, or perfect silence. The whispers, the breathing, they existed only for me, inside the closed system between the ear cups and my eardrums. Was I losing my mind? The isolation I craved for work was turning into a terrifying prison. One evening, exhausted and desperate, I put the headphones on, determined to confront it. I sat perfectly still at my desk, focusing only on the silence, waiting. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, the breathing started, slow and raspy. The whispers followed, closer this time, swirling around me. Listening, Alex, always listening. Then, a new sound emerged. A soft, rhythmic clicking, like fingernails tapping gently on glass. Originating from inside the left ear cup. My blood ran cold. I could almost feel the vibration against my ear. Panic seized me. I ripped the headphones off and threw them across the room. They hit the wall with a crack, one ear cup dangling by a wire. I stood panting, staring at the damaged device lying on the floor. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, loud and chaotic after the sterile void. But the relief was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, I became aware of a new sound. A faint, dry whisper. No longer needing the headphones as a conduit. It seemed to emanate from the corner of the room, or perhaps, from inside my own head. Stay with you now, Alex, always. I haven't touched the broken Aura X headphones since. They sit in a box tucked away in my closet. But the silence is gone forever. The whispers remain, a constant, insidious companion. Sometimes they're faint, just a background hiss to my thoughts. Other times, especially when I'm alone and it's quiet, they become clearer, echoing my fears, feeding my paranoia. I sought silence, a shield from the noise of the world. Instead, I found something that had been waiting in the quiet all along. And it followed me out. It's an echo chamber I can't escape. A noise cancellation that failed, letting the worst possible sound seep through. The one that comes from within. The Stillness Collector. It started with the photos. Not mine, but the ones left behind in the old cedar chest I bought at a flea market. Tucked beneath yellowed linens and moth-eaten lace was a small, leather-bound album. Inside, brittle pages held faded black and white photographs, empty rooms, desolate landscapes, chairs facing vacant corners. Streets utterly devoid of people or vehicles. Each image possessed a profound, almost suffocating stillness. No life, no movement. Just frozen moments of absolute vacancy. My name is Clara. I'm a historian, specializing in social archiving, piecing together lives from letters, diaries, and yes, photographs. This album felt different from the usual family snapshots. There was an intentionality to the emptiness. An artistic quality that was both beautiful and deeply unnerving. There were no captions, no dates, no clues to the photographer. Only that persistent, hollow quiet captured on film. I took the album home to my quiet, book-filled apartment. Driven by professional curiosity, I decided to try and replicate the style. I had an old analog camera, a relic from my grandfather, that I rarely used. I loaded it with black and white film and set out to capture my own moments of stillness, my empty office chair after hours, a deserted park bench at dawn. The vacant hallway outside my apartment door just before sunrise. Developing the film in my makeshift darkroom, the guest bathroom. I felt a strange sense of anticipation. The chemical smell hung heavy in the air. As the first images slowly materialized in the developer tray, a chill traced its way down my spine. They looked too still. My empty chair didn't just look unoccupied, it looked fundamentally incapable of ever being occupied. The park bench seemed carved from stone, radiating a cold permanence. The hallway wasn't just empty. It felt like a vacuum, absorbing sound and light. They echoed the unsettling vacancy of the album photos perfectly. Disturbed but intrigued, I continued the project. I photographed more empty spaces. A library reading room after closing, an abandoned bus stop on a foggy morning. The reflection of an empty window in a puddle. Each time I developed the film, the same unnerving quality emerged. The stillness wasn't just an absence of life, it felt like an active presence, a quality the camera was somehow imposing on the scene. Then things started to change, not just in the photos, but around me. It began with small sounds disappearing. The gentle hum of my refrigerator seemed quieter. The distant traffic noise Outside my window faded more than usual. The ticking of the antique clock on my mantel grew faint, almost imperceptible. At first, I attributed it to focus, being absorbed in my work. But the quiet deepened day by day. One afternoon, I was photographing my own living room, the empty armchair, the unlit fireplace. As I looked through the viewfinder, the familiar sounds of my apartment, the settling creaks, the whisper of the ventilation, abruptly ceased. A profound silence descended. So sudden and complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. My breath hitched. I lowered the camera, and the sounds instantly returned, rushing back in like a held breath being released. My heart was pounding. It happened again later that day while photographing the kitchen sink. Viewfinder up, absolute silence. Viewfinder down, normal ambient noise. The camera wasn't just capturing stillness, it felt like it was creating it, stealing the ambient sound from the moment I framed the shot. Paranoia began to set in. Was the camera malfunctioning? Was I malfunctioning? I started leaving the camera untouched for days at a time. But the encroaching silence didn't recede. Sounds around me continued to feel muffled, distant. Conversations overheard on the street seemed to lack resonance. Music playing from a neighbor's window sounded thin and tinny. The world was losing its auditory texture. One evening, desperate to prove I wasn't imagining things, I set up a digital audio recorder next to the camera while I took a picture of the empty bookshelf. I framed the shot, felt that familiar pressure of silence descend, clicked the shutter, and lowered the camera. When I played back the audio recording, I heard the normal room tone, the click of the shutter, and then, at the exact moment I'd taken the picture, there was a fraction of a second of pure, digital silence on the recording. A perfect void where sound should have been. It wasn't just my perception. The camera was doing something. Sleep became difficult. The silence in my apartment at night felt thick and watchful. I started hearing faint static in the quiet, similar to the hiss people report in sensory deprivation tanks. Sometimes, I'd wake abruptly, convinced a sound had startled me, only to find myself enveloped in that heavy, unnatural stillness. I decided to research the camera itself. It was an old model, fairly common. Nothing overtly special. But the cedar chest it likely came from, assuming the album and camera were connected, belonged to an estate with little public history, just a name and a plot in a local cemetery. The previous owner had lived and died alone, leaving few records. One weekend, I took the camera and the album back to the flea market, hoping the vendor might remember something. He was an old man with cloudy eyes. When I showed him the album, his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He claimed he didn't remember specifics, just that the chest came from a house clearance, one the neighbors called the Quiet House. He muttered something about the previous owner being a recluse, obsessed with capturing silence. He wouldn't say more, looking away quickly, his hands fidgeting. The interaction left me colder than before. That night, I couldn't resist taking one more photo. I set the camera on a tripod facing my bedroom mirror, wanting to capture the stillness of my own reflection while I slept. I used the timer function. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, the silence pressing down. In the morning, I developed the film with trembling hands. The image that emerged made me gasp, dropping the print into the chemical tray. It showed my empty bed, the covers slightly rumpled, but where my reflection should have been in the mirror on the wall, there was only a flat, gray void, like the mirror was reflecting a patch of impenetrable fog. My own image had been utterly erased, consumed by the stillness. I haven't used the camera since. I wrapped it in cloth and buried it deep in my closet. behind boxes I never open. I put the photo album away with it. But the silence lingers. My hearing hasn't returned to normal. The world still sounds muted, distant. Sometimes, when I look in a mirror, my reflection seems faded, less substantial than it should be. The worst part is the quiet moments, especially at night. In the deep stillness of my apartment, I sometimes feel a pull. A yearning for that absolute void the camera captured. A terrifying whisper in the back of my mind suggests that the stillness wasn't just in the photos where the camera, it was collected, harvested. And maybe, just maybe, a part of my own presence, my own sound, my own reflection, was collected too, leaving me permanently quieter. Permanently less, trapped in the echo of an impossible silence. The pattern painter. It wasn't the house itself that felt wrong, but the wallpaper. When my partner, Ben, and I bought the old Victorian fixer-upper, we knew we were in for work. Peeling paint, drafty windows, questionable plumbing, the usual suspects. But the master bedroom had this bizarre, faded wallpaper. It depicted intricate, swirling patterns in muted greens and golds, almost like abstract waves or dense foliage. It was ugly, frankly, but strangely mesmerizing. You could stare at it for hours and keep finding new, complex loops and whirls you hadn't noticed before. Our plan was simple: strip the old paper, repair the plaster, and paint the walls a calming neutral. We started the project on a Saturday morning, armed with steamers, scrapers, and optimism. As the first few layers came off, revealing older, even stranger patterns beneath, the air in the room grew heavy, almost resistant. The light seemed to dim, and a faint, dry smell, like old paper in something vaguely metallic, filled the space. That's when I first saw it. Beneath a particularly stubborn patch of the topmost layer, etched faintly into the plaster itself, was a small section of the same swirling pattern from the wallpaper. Not printed, but carved, like a deliberate hidden signature. Ben didn't seem to notice, humming as he worked. But I felt a sudden, sharp chill despite the stuffy room. My hand froze, scraper hovering over the faint etching. It felt wrong to disturb it. I quickly covered it with another piece of loose paper, pretending I hadn't seen it, my heart thudding uncomfortably. As we continued working, stripping away decades of paper, we found more of these etchings scattered across the walls. Tiny, intricate spirals mirroring the wallpaper designs, hidden beneath layers. Almost like the walls themselves had been tattooed. Ben finally noticed one. "Weird," he muttered, running a finger over the shallow groove. Maybe the original owner was practicing the design? He shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The patterns felt less like decoration and more like circuitry, or a map of something unknowable. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Lying in the guest room, while the master was under renovation, I kept seeing those swirling patterns behind my closed eyelids. They pulsed gently, shifting and rearranging themselves in the darkness of my mind. I dismissed it as my brain processing the repetitive visual information from the day's work. The next day, we finished stripping the walls. The room felt bare, exposed, the plaster marked with those faint, scattered etchings. We patched the larger cracks, sanded the surfaces, and applied a coat of primer, covering the swirls. The room instantly felt brighter, cleaner. The oppressive heaviness lifted slightly. "See?" Ben said, smiling. "Much better already." But the relief was temporary. That evening, as the primer dried, I noticed something odd. A faint discoloration was appearing on one section of the primed wall. It looked almost like moisture bleed through, but it formed a distinct shape. A faint, ghostly echo of one of the swirling patterns we had just covered. My breath caught. I touched the spot, it was bone dry. "Ben, look at this," I whispered, my voice tight. He squinted at it. "Ha! Must be damp in the plaster. Or maybe some old stain bleeding through the primer. We'll give it another coat tomorrow." We applied a second, thicker coat of primer the next day. By evening, the ghostly pattern had reappeared, slightly darker this time, pushing through the fresh layer. We tried a stain-blocking primer. It bled through again. It was always the same pattern, in the same spot, like a persistent memory, embedded in the wall itself. Around the same time, I started noticing patterns elsewhere. The condensation trails on the bathroom mirrors seemed to form intricate loops before evaporating. The grain in the wooden kitchen table looked more complex, swirling in ways I hadn't noticed before. The arrangement of fallen leaves on the lawn outside seemed oddly deliberate. Was I just becoming obsessed, seeing patterns everywhere because of the wallpaper? Or was something spreading? The nightmares started soon after. I dreamed I was tracing the patterns on the bedroom wall with my finger, feeling the plaster crumble beneath my touch. In the dream, the etched lines glowed with a faint, sickly green light, and a low hum resonated through the house, vibrating up my arm. I'd wake up with my heart racing, the humming sensation still faintly buzzing in my fingertips, convinced the patterns were somehow alive. Ben remained skeptical, blaming old plaster and an overactive imagination. But even he grew quiet when, after applying the final coat of paint, a thick, high-quality eggshell finish, the pattern reappeared within hours. Clearer than ever, a ghostly green-gold swirl against the neutral paint. It wasn't bleeding through, it looked like it was forming from within the paint itself. We stopped working on the bedroom. The door remained closed. But the phenomenon didn't stay contained. One morning, I found a faint, swirling pattern, similar but smaller, etched into the condensation on the kitchen window. By the time Ben came downstairs, it had evaporated. Another day, I opened a book I hadn't touched in weeks and found a faint, spiraling pencil sketch on the inside cover, in a style eerily reminiscent of the wall etchings. I didn't own pencils that soft, and I hadn't drawn it. The patterns were migrating. I started researching the house's history, digging through town archives. I found records of a previous owner, a reclusive artist named Elias Thorne, who lived there decades ago. He was known for intricate, almost hypnotic abstract paintings. An old newspaper article mentioned local rumors about his living paint and how his patterns seemed to grow beyond the canvas. He had disappeared suddenly, leaving the house vacant for years. No paintings were ever found. A cold dread washed over me. Was Thorne the pattern painter? Were these etchings and the reappearing swirls some lingering echo of his work, or something more sinister he had invoked? The final straw came last night. Ben was working late. I was alone, reading in the living room, trying to ignore the closed door of the master bedroom upstairs. I felt a familiar prickle on my skin. Slowly, hesitantly, I looked down at my own arm. There, faint but undeniable, like a brand just beginning to surface, was a swirling pattern etched into my skin. It didn't hurt, but it pulsed with a faint warmth. It mirrored a section of the design from the cursed bedroom wall. I didn't scream. A chilling calm descended. It felt inevitable. The patterns weren't just on the walls or in the condensation anymore. They were seeking a new canvas. I don't know what happens next. The pattern on my arm is slightly darker this morning. Ben hasn't seen it yet. I keep it covered. But I can feel it, a faint thrumming beneath my skin. The house is quiet today, almost peaceful. But I see the swirls everywhere, in the clouds, in the wood grain, in the very air itself. Elias Thorne didn't just paint patterns. He painted a process. A contagion. And it's still spreading, finding new surfaces, etching itself onto whatever it touches. Starting with the walls, and ending, well, I think it's ending with me. The whispering walls. The old house whispered from the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't the wind, which was still that day, or the settling of ancient timber. It was a sound just beneath hearing. A faint exhalation that seemed to brush against my ears when I was perfectly still. I'd bought the place for a song, charmed by its gabled roof and overgrown garden, dismissing the local rumors of it being unsettled. The first week was mundane. Unpacking boxes, the scent of old wood and dust. Then, small things started. A book I'd left on the coffee table would be on the mantelpiece. Keys I swore I'd hung by the door would be in the kitchen drawer. I chalked it up to moving fatigue, my mind playing tricks. Then came the whispers, clearer now, always from the corner of a room, or just behind a closed door. They weren't words, not at first, just a soft, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across stone. My dog, Buster, a fearless terrier, would often freeze, his head cocked, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared at an empty space. One evening, I was reading in the living room. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Suddenly, from the hallway, I heard my own voice, a perfect mimicry. Hum a tune I hadn't thought of in years. My blood ran cold. I called out, "Hello?" Only the clock answered. Buster whimpered, pressing against my leg. The incidents escalated. I'd find objects arranged in strange patterns on the floor, pebbles from the garden, old buttons I hadn't even unpacked yet. One morning, I found my journal, which I kept locked in my desk, open on the kitchen table. A single sentence was scrawled in handwriting eerily similar to my own. "We're glad you're here." Panic began to set in. I started sleeping with the lights on, jumping at every creak. The whispers became more distinct, almost forming words, but always just out of comprehension. Like listening to a conversation through a thick wall. They seemed to follow me, shifting from room to room. One night, I woke to a chilling silence. Even the clock had stopped. A profound sense of dread filled me, and I knew, with a certainty that bypassed all reason, that whatever was in the house was in the room with me. I lay frozen, barely breathing. Then, a whisper, so close it felt like breath. On my neck, perfectly clear this time, in my own voice, "Don't leave." I didn't scream. I couldn't. I slowly, carefully, slipped out of bed. The air was icy. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw it, a faint shimmer. By the window, a distortion in the air that subtly took on a human-like form. Tall and slender. It didn't have features, but I felt it watching me. I snatched my keys and Buster, and fled. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, not daring to look back. I drove through the night. The image of that shimmering form burned into my mind. I never went back to the house. I sold it through an agent, never mentioning what I'd experienced, for fear of sounding insane. Sometimes, though, late at night, when my new apartment is quiet, I hear it. A faint whisper, just on the edge of hearing, brushing against my ear. And occasionally, just occasionally, I find small objects in my home have moved. Just a little, when I'm sure I haven't touched them. It's a cold reminder that some whispers, once heard, travel with you. The algorithm of unease. It started subtly, the way these things always do. My social media feed, Connects Fear, began showing me things I'd only thought about. A niche hobby I'd considered picking up, a childhood cartoon I hadn't mentioned to anyone in years, an obscure musician a friend had briefly played at a party. I'd chuckle, thinking, wow, the algorithm is getting scarily good. Then it got more specific. After a private, tearful phone call with my sister, About a difficult memory, my feed was suddenly full of articles on coping with that exact type of past trauma. I hadn't searched for anything related to it. A cold prickle ran down my spine. I told myself it was a coincidence. A hyper-targeted ad based on some vague demographic data. But ConnectSphere kept digging. It started showing me memories. Posts I'd supposedly made years ago that I had no recollection of creating. Photos of places I'd never been, captioned in my distinct writing style. With comments from friends whose profiles seemed to be populated by stock images and generic interests. When I tried to delete these phantom posts, error messages would pop up, or the app would crash. The targeted content became insidious. If I felt a fleeting moment of anxiety about my apartment's old wiring, ads for electricians would appear. If I idly wondered about a distant relative I hadn't seen in a decade, their rarely updated profile would suddenly be suggested for you. It was like ConnectSphere wasn't just predicting my interests. It was reading my mind, plucking out my most private anxieties and fleeting thoughts. I tried to fight it. I'd search for random, unrelated topics, quantum physics, historical knitting patterns, the migratory habits of Arctic terns, hoping to confuse the algorithm. But the next day, nestled between an article on string theory and a tutorial for a Shetland lace shawl, would be a chillingly accurate post about how I'd always secretly felt like an outsider, even among friends. The worst was when it started interacting. Not through direct messages, but through the content itself. I'd see a sponsored post. Feeling like someone is watching you, my name? It's just us. Making sure you see what matters. Or a quiz, which of your deepest fears will manifest next? Click to find out. The tone was always light, almost playful, which made it even more disturbing. I deleted my ConnectSphere account. Or I tried to. The deactivation process would stall, or the app would simply reinstall itself overnight. I uninstalled it from my phone, my laptop, my tablet. For a few days, there was silence. Blessed, normal silence. Then, my smart speaker, unprompted, began playing songs I'd only ever listened to in secret, during moments of intense emotion. My email started suggesting drafts for messages I'd only composed in my head to people I hadn't contacted. The ads on websites I visited mirrored the chillingly personal suggestions ConnectSphere used to make. It wasn't just one app. It was as if the algorithm had escaped, becoming a digital ghost haunting all my online interactions, seeping into the very fabric of my digital life. Last night, I decided to go completely offline. I unplugged everything. I sat in the dark, phone off, laptop closed. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, my smart thermostat, which I hadn't even realized was still connected to the Wi-Fi, lit up. The display, usually showing the temperature, simply read, "We miss you, my name. Don't worry. We still know what you're thinking." I haven't turned anything back on. But even in the silence, I can almost feel it, a pervasive, invisible network, listening, learning, waiting. And I keep wondering, what will it show me next? And how will it know? The unseen commute. The 7:42 a.m. train was always the same. A symphony of the mundane, the rustle of newspapers, the click of laptop keys, the sigh of the pneumatic doors. I'd been writing it for 5 years. And the faces, while ever-changing, blurred into a familiar backdrop. Until last Tuesday. It started with a woman sitting opposite me. She was impeccably dressed, reading a book, but her gaze was fixed on a point just above the pages. She didn't blink. Not once, for the entire 20-minute journey to my stop. Her smile, when she briefly looked up and it caught my eye, was too wide, too static. It didn't reach her eyes. which remained glassy and unfocused. I dismissed it as an oddity. Someone lost in thought. Wednesday, it was a man a few seats down. He held his phone to his ear, seemingly in conversation. But his lips didn't move. His head nodded occasionally. But the movements were slightly out of sync, like a poorly looped animation. And his skin, it had a waxy pallor, almost too smooth. By Thursday, I couldn't ignore it. At least a third of the passengers on my carriage shared these traits. A faint, shared stillness. Eyes that didn't quite track. Smiles that were more like masks. Their movements were rehearsed. As if they were learning how to be human. And not quite getting it right. I started to feel a suffocating dread. I told myself I was stressed, overtired. But the way they'd sometimes turn their heads, just a fraction of a second too late, to look at something. Or the way their hands would rest in their laps with an unnatural porcelain stillness, it was deeply wrong. Friday was the worst. The train was more crowded with them. They didn't speak to each other. Or to anyone else. They just sat, or stood, perfectly emulating commuters. But with that hollowness behind their eyes. I noticed one man reading a newspaper upside down, his fingers tracing lines of text that made no sense. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt intensely, terrifyingly alone. Surrounded by these silent mimics. Then, the train entered the long tunnel. Before my station. The lights flickered, a common occurrence, and then went out. Plunging us into near darkness, lit only by the emergency strips along the floor. In that dim, greenish glow, I looked at the reflections in the darkened windows. The faces looking back were not the ones I'd seen just moments before. Where the woman with the unblinking stare had been. The reflection showed a gaunt shadow, its mouth stretched into an impossible silent O. The man with the phone showed only a blur where his head should be. Their reflections were subtly distorted, elongated. Their human guises slipping in the low light. And they were all looking at me. Not their physical forms, but their reflections. Every single one. The lights sputtered back on just as the train pulled into my station. Their faces were normal again. Masks perfectly in place. I practically threw myself out of the doors, gasping for air, my legs trembling. I called in sick for a week. When I finally forced myself back onto the 7:42 a.m., the carriage was full of ordinary people, laughing, scrolling on their phones. Looking tired or bored, utterly, beautifully normal. Relief washed over me so intensely I almost cried. It had been a stress-induced hallucination. A waking nightmare. As I settled into my seat, the woman next to me, who had been engrossed in her tablet, looked up. She gave me a small, polite smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. And she didn't blink. I got off at the very next stop. I take the bus now. It takes longer, but so far, everyone blinks. So far. But every morning, as I wait, I look at the faces around me. Searching for that telltale stillness, that smile that's just a little too fixed. How many of them are there? And how long have they been riding among us? Unseen? The house that remembered. When we bought the old farmhouse. It was the land we fell in love with, rolling hills, ancient oak trees. A sense of peaceful isolation. The house itself was charmingly dilapidated. A project we were eager to undertake. The previous owner, a reclusive elderly woman, had passed away, and the house had sat empty for a year. The renovations started well. New paint, sanded floors. The scent of fresh timber replacing the musty air. But as we stripped back the layers of wallpaper in the living room, we found something odd. Beneath decades of floral patterns, the original plaster was covered in faint, childlike drawings. Not playful scribbles, but unsettlingly precise sketches. A stick figure with wide, staring eyes, a house with smoke curling from the chimney in a spiral, a sun with too many rays, all drawn in what looked like charcoal. We painted over them, a little unnerved, but dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination from long ago. Then, stranger things began. We'd leave a room, and upon returning moments later, find small objects subtly rearranged. A teacup moved an inch to the left. A book on the shelf tilted at a slightly different angle. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of thing you'd doubt your own memory over. My partner, Liam, thought I was being overly sensitive. Old houses settle, an object might shift, he'd say. But the settling didn't explain why the temperature in certain spots would drop suddenly, leaving goosebumps on my arms even on a warm day. Or why, sometimes, the scent of old perfume, sweet and cloying, would drift through a room with no discernible source. The drawings were the most persistent. We'd paint a wall, and within a week, faint outlines of those same unsettling charcoal sketches would begin to bleed through the new paint, like memories seeping from the plaster itself. The stick figure with the staring eyes. The spiraling smoke. The overrayed sun. No matter how many coats we applied, they'd eventually reappear. Fainter each time, but undeniably there. One evening, I was alone in the kitchen, Liam having gone into town for supplies. I was washing dishes, the only sound the running water. Suddenly, from the living room, I heard it, a child's soft hum, a simple, repetitive melody. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept to the doorway, peering in. The room was empty, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. The humming stopped. But in the center of the newly sanded floor, where no dust should have been, was a fresh charcoal drawing, the stick figure. Its eyes wider than before, and next to it, a crude drawing of me. I started to feel like the house itself was an entity, observing us. Remembering. It wasn't aggressive, not in a menacing way. It was more like a persistent, quiet presence, making itself known in these small, unsettling ways. Liam finally started to believe me when the lullaby began. It would play softly at night, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. A gentle, melancholic tune, the same one I'd heard the child humming. It was never loud enough to be definitively recorded, always fading if we tried to pinpoint its source. Sleep became a tense, shallow affair. We hired historians, tried to find records about the houses past, about the children who might have lived there. We found nothing concrete, just whispers of a family who had lived there generations ago, a family that had suffered some unnamed tragedy involving a child. The most chilling discovery came when we decided to replace the old, warped floorboards in the nursery, a room we hadn't touched yet. Beneath them, tucked into a dusty corner, was a small, worn wooden toy, a crudely carved spinning top, and scrawled onto its surface, in the same childlike charcoal, was the stick figure, the spiraling smoke, and the overrayed sun. The house wasn't just remembering. It was holding onto something. Or someone. We decided to leave. We couldn't fight something so ingrained in the very structure of the building. As we packed our last boxes, the lullaby played, softer than ever. Almost like a farewell. The charcoal drawings on the living room wall were barely visible now, faded like old photographs. We sold the house, disclosing only that it had character. Sometimes, I wonder about the new owners. I wonder if they've noticed the subtle shifts. The cold spots, the faint scent of perfume. I wonder if they've started painting over walls, only to find old memories bleeding through. And sometimes, very late at night, when my own house is quiet, I think I can hear it, just for a fleeting moment, that soft, melancholic lullaby, a reminder that some places never truly forget.